From Community Public Radio, this is the CPR News. From New York, I'm Don DeBar. Today we go to Moscow to speak with analyst and lecturer Mark Sloboda about the same thing we spoke about last week, I guess, Mark, which is the developing or ripening, or maybe it's ripened already, conflict in and around Ukraine with the U.S., NATO, and Russia, and a bit part being played by the Ukrainians and Germans. Welcome, first of all.
Yeah, Don, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on CPR.
Our pleasure also.
What I guess the big news in the past few days is that we have seen a little flurry of diplomatic activity launched by the Europeans. We saw on the same day, on Monday, we saw Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, visit Moscow and speak to Putin. And we saw the new chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, go to Washington, D.C. and speak to Joe Biden. And I find this division of labor in a kind of an attempt to play a mediator role between the two after U.S.-Russian talks have failed, kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, Macron is no de Gaulle, for example.
Macron is no Napoleon. He's no de Gaulle. Of course, he has pretensions of being both.
He's about Napoleon's height, right?
Yeah. I think he's married to Napoleon's mother or something like that.
There you go.
So he came to Moscow, and evidently Putin and Macron spoke for like 6 hours. And they came out of the meeting into a joint press conference where they were pretty much, while they seem to have reached the conclusion that dialogue will continue, which dialogue was going to continue at this point anyway, so I'm not so sure it was a major accomplishment. But Macron jetted just the next day to Ukraine to speak to Zelensky. But Macron and Putin were talking past each other, basically, at the joint press conference, while still maintaining some type of cordial. The Russian president even referred to Macron with the familiar form of you rather than the more normal formal form, which is seen as some type of friendly personalization or something.
Right, T, not V, yeah.
Yeah, T instead of we. The thing is that as soon as Macron was basically out of Russia, he left saying that they had discussed some proposals, and Russia said, well, we're willing to discuss these proposals, but there's no word on what these proposals were whatsoever. Macron left Moscow, and almost as soon as he did, we had anonymous French officials telling the Financial Times that Russia had agreed to one, that when joint Russian-Belarusian military drills in Belarus are over on February 20th, that Russia would bring those troops home rather than keep them in Belarus and so on. Which, if there is not to be an intervention, of course, they would do anyway. Then he also said that an agreement was reached where that Russia would begin no new military initiatives regarding or near Ukraine. Okay, that seems to have been a major, diplomatic coup, breaking the tensions here and everything. The only problem with that.
What's the consideration for that? What did they get in exchange?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was no word on that. It was not said by Macron, and it was not said by Putin either of them in their press conference immediately following this meeting. And then, sure enough, a few hours later, the Russian presidential spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, comes out and says, no, actually, we didn't agree to any of that. And it's actually impossible for us to come to any type of agreement with France because this is all concerning NATO, and France is just a member of NATO, but the U.S. leads it. So how could we come to a deal with France, right? Basically saying, who the hell is France? This seems, have been an attempt to put Macron back in his place. But here's the game. Macron is in a tight election year. He's running for re-election. And there's right now the polls show that only 25% of the French are willing to vote for him as president again. That doesn't. I mean, there's a wide range of candidates. The other candidates are still behind him by a few points, but it's a tight race.
Marine Le Pen is out there saying, by the way, the whole idea of having hostilities with Russia is insane. In the French national interest, which is what I'm concerned with, it's in our interest to be friends and trading partners with Russia, and she's climbing the polls with that.
Yeah, actually, there are two right-wing and two left-wing candidates on either side of Macron, all of whom are in favor of better relations with Russia and chilling relations with NATO. Yep. So that actually explains a lot about Macron's diplomatic initiative to come here and the statements he made afterwards, which were dismissed by the Kremlin.
Let me just insert one piece of historical context here. NATO's original headquarters were in Paris, and de Gaulle made them move it basically when about a year or two before de Gaulle actually pulled out of NATO. I think he pulled out in '66. I think he made them move the headquarters in '64.
NATO military command.
Yeah. Well, it's a military alliance.
And there are political, large political aspects to it too. But yeah.
But the headquarters moved to Brussels then.
Yeah, and Sarkozy brought it back in just over the last decade into NATO's military command.
For sure.
Macron is no de Gaulle, of course.
Yes,
as we've already said. Macron was playing to his domestic audience. One, he is showing a diplomatic initiative to Russia, trying to cut off that argument right there, which gets some traction with the French population. That the relations with Russia should not be so tense. But more than that, he's playing the grand statesman. And the idea that he could bring some great foreign policy victory home presents France as an important country on the world stage, which it's not really so much, and Macron as the great grand statesman leader of that France. Unfortunately, it's all fake. And the Kremlin said, we didn't agree to any of that. What are you talking about? Right. But the headlines in most of the papers don't cover the Russian reply that we didn't actually agree to any of that. Not only couldn't we, but an agreement is only possible with the U.S. because they lead NATO, not France. So, but this is mostly French domestic politics. Supposedly, whatever proposals that Macron brought to Zelensky, which I would assume have to do with finally forcing the regime in Kiev to agree to the Minsk Accords, to fulfill the Minsk Accords that they agreed to, that Zelensky reaffirmed with the Steinmeier formula, that have laid unfulfilled since 2015. And we just, in recent days, had the head of the Kiev regime National Security and Defense Council, Alexei Danilov, say that to fulfill the Minsk Accords would mean the destruction of Ukraine. And what he means is not the destruction of Ukraine. He means the destruction of the regime that seized power in Ukraine in 2014. Because if they started to fulfill it, the ultra-nationalists, Banderite fascists, who are now integrated throughout the military, the police, the security services, the mainstream political parties, etc., they would revolt. There would be another Maidan, and it would be against Zelensky, against the government there, and it would be utter and complete chaos, which of course Russia knows very well. I mean, there's not
Right. That's not an
there's no
attractive.
question,
Right.
but they're trying that way to show the political instability in Ukraine and how much the government there, the regime in Kiev, does depend on the far right as their brown shirts. They were the vanguard of the Maidan. They were the forefront of the initial attacks on Donbass until they managed to purge and get control of the military. And they are still the ideological backing and the main political support behind the regime. And Zelensky's own approval ratings have dropped from 75% when he was first elected on some vague promises of bringing peace to the country, and are now down in the low 20s. So obviously the country is reacting to him not bringing peace one way or the other. So he evidently did not respond well to what we presume is a renewed push for Kiev to fulfill the Minsk Accords, and once again said that he would never meet directly with the political leaders in Donbass because they are just Russian proxies. They're not real political representatives. Never mind, of course, that Russia has since adopted the policy that there's no reason for Moscow to talk to Zelensky or anyone in Kiev because they're just U.S. proxies. So they just deal with the U.S.
And not only that, the Rada outlawed the actual representatives under Ukrainian law of the people in the East.
Yes. And the head of the opposition bloc, which is the main political party now of East Ukraine after the Communist Party was banned and the Party of Regions was lustrated, it took them several years. They reformed as the opposition bloc, and just last year, the opposition bloc was some polls were starting to show it as the most popular political party in the country.
Right.
And right then, Zelensky goes after them. He shuts down every media outlet, TV, web, radio, anything that represents the political voices of East Ukraine and is critical of his government from that perspective, and he just shut them down. He banned them all, and the leader of the opposition bloc, Viktor Medvedchuk, is now being charged with politicized treason charges, which is, ironically enough, the same treason charges he then brought against his other political opponent,
right,
the former Kiev putsch president, the candy oligarch Petro Poroshenko. They're both being charged with the same ridiculous charges, which are that they were both involved in deals in 2015 to get coal from the Donbass, because that's where the majority of Ukraine's coal was.
That's where the coal is.
But because the people of Donbass, not accepting the overthrow of the government that they had overwhelmingly elected in 2014, they are terrorists. This is what Kiev labeled them, and Poroshenko and Medvedchuk are both committed treason by conducting economic deals to get the energy that the government
material support for
from
terrorism.
the Donbass.
Yeah,
material support for terror. Yeah, that's how ridiculous it is. And he's gone after both of his major political opponents with this. They're both facing treason charges. Medvedchuk is under house arrest, and Poroshenko, of course, the irony there is Poroshenko brought treason charges against the guy that he overthrew, Yanukovych.
Yeah, it's a tradition.
So a little bit of karma coming back on him there.
Well, from him, though, when you get the indictment, it comes with a box of chocolate.
Yeah. Putin even did a bit of trolling on him during his press conference with Macron, and he offered Poroshenko political asylum.
Of
course,
he rejected it yesterday,
for the political persecution. But what he's doing is pointing out that despite all the rhetoric to the contrary, Ukraine is a free, democratic, sovereign country. No, Now, the regime since 2014, it's Orwellian. It is the exact opposite of democracy, right? I mean, they are having, quote, elections, unquote, literally under the barrel, not just of a gun, but the shelling of Grad and
Right.
Azov jackboots,
Right.
brown shirt jackboots in East
Yep.
Ukraine.
Actual ones. Yep.
With major political parties, all the major leftist parties in the country banned, other parties lustrated, pogrom convinced of their leaders, 3 million Ukrainians living and who most of whom have actually, there's about 5 million living, 3 million who fled from East Ukraine, fled from their own Kiev regime's offensive on the Donbass to subjugate them to their seizure of power in Kiev. They fled there. All these Ukrainians living and working in aggressor Russia, some 3 to 5 million of them, they can't vote back home. Whereas all of the Ukrainians elsewhere abroad in the world can go and vote their embassies, right?
In Canada, for example.
Ukrainians in Poland, Ukrainians in Canada, in the US, UK, they can all vote. But the largest group of Ukrainians abroad in Russia, they can't vote. Why? Because they're politically not because Russia would control the election inside the Ukrainian embassy, but because they're politically unreliable, right? They
might vote against them.
Not anti-Russian Ukrainians. So that view is no longer acceptable, and that is very much ethnopolitical cleansing of a form. And Zelensky, himself said that if a Ukrainian citizen feels himself to be Russian, he should go to Russia. He should get out of the country. The problem with that, of course, of the Ukrainian population is Russian, particularly in East Ukraine. And on top of that, much of the rest of the population of East Ukraine, and no small part of Central Ukraine, regards Russians as brothers, fraternal peoples just separated by a border, and are often intermarried, so you can't even tell what is an ethnic Russian and what is an ethnic Ukrainian. But that is the political ideology of the new Ukraine, of the Kiev regime, that having feelings of fraternity with Russia, that is no longer acceptable. That is treason. That is traitorous. And plus the policy continues. Of course, there will not be peace in Ukraine. That is the internal divide that Ukrainian presidents previous to this have always balanced by not swinging too hard to either of the contradictory Ukrainian national identities in West Ukraine, which is very anti-Russian because of their history, that they were part of the Austro-Hungarian Commonwealth, the Polish-Lithuanian the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and large numbers of them in Galicia welcomed the Nazi invaders with open arms and helped them perpetuate the Holocaust. And those are declared the new heroes of Ukraine, the founding fathers, because it's the only. If you're going to manufacture an anti-Russian Ukraine, it is the only point in Ukrainian history where there was an anti-Russian Ukraine. So that's all they have to fall back on. And that's why you have even a nominally of Jewish descent president like Zelensky happy to support, to have neo-Nazis throughout his military, police, security services, National Guard, the major political parties, because their hate is directed primarily for the moment against ethnic Russians, Slovak East Ukrainians, and leftists.
Right. Let me just say, the neo-Nazi label.
Continuation of its regime.
I'm sorry. The neo-Nazi label to me, like, we're talking like David Duke, people that have like a new ideology that sounds in the Nazi version of fascism. But when they're worshiping the guys who, were like welcoming Hitler, I don't know if neo applies. And that the way they march and those torchlight things. I mean, there's some updating. I think it's Nazi 2.0. Right? Maybe instead of neo-Nazi, it's more like Nazi 2.0.
They're old school, homegrown West Ukrainian fascists,
Yep.
who regard the organization of Ukrainian nationalists and Ukrainian insurgent armies as heroes,
Right.
rather than butchers who massacred Jews, Poles, Russians, East Ukrainians, and fought alongside Hitler
Right.
up until the end.
Millions of them, by the way,
Zelensky
folks.
did not accept.
Millions of them, by the way.
Yeah, millions of them. So anyway, Zelensky evidently did not respond well to any idea of, making him fulfill the Minsk Accords. And the reason why the Minsk Accords is the way out of this is, first of all, it would end the civil conflict in the country, right? It would make Ukraine something along the model of Bosnia-Herzegovina, with the Bosnian Serbs on one side, and the Muslim Bosnia-Herzegovinans on the other, but making them in a joint country with broad federalization that keeps the country more or less neutral, and is just manages the country more than anything else. And it has to be remembered that Ukraine was peaceable since '92, primarily because they were neutral. They did not swing either to the West or to Russia. Right. They did not join NATO. They did not join the Collective Security Treaty Organization. They were going to join the EU, but that wasn't seen at the time as hostile until Yanukovych took a look at the neoliberal shock therapy diktat and said, well, this would economically break the country and whatever the political power of any government that brought it in, because it would unemploy tens of millions of people and bankrupt the state and everything else.
That's a political liability.
And that is the sin of 2014, of the Maidan, is that the U.S. was no longer happy with a neutral Ukraine. It was a gray political space on the board that had to be geopolitically consolidated while they still could do it. And that was Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Piet and John McCain, openly cheerleading and picking, on the insurrection in the country, picking the new government of Ukraine would be, as they were caught on tape planning it out, while disparaging the EU as not really getting a say in the process.
Yeah, by the way, Vicky Nuland was supposed to be the State Department special representative for European affairs, saying those words about Europe.
Yeah. Zelensky has evidently not responded well to Macron's proposals, and that seems to again, return us to a diplomatic stagnation, where the Minsk Accords would provide a way out of this, because without NATO promising that they would not bring Ukraine into NATO, Ukraine would not be able to join NATO, because with a federalized country, a autonomous Donbass would always have a veto over that.
Right.
So it is a way out of it, right? Where NATO is not necessarily conceding anything. Political stability and reconciliation is brought to Ukraine, and Ukraine is once again a neutral country that doesn't go to NATO and doesn't go to the Russian-led Collective Security Treaty Organization.
Right.
It would seem to be the way out of this, but it would mean the end of the regime in Kiev. And they've been quite open about that, and they will not accept that. Meanwhile, Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, goes to Washington, and they try to present the idea that they are some unilateral front against, Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that there will be a complete unity and agreed upon response. And right after that, Joe Biden starts talking about how the Russian-German pipeline Nord Stream 2, if Russia intervenes, will be dead, that it will never come online. And Olaf Scholz is sitting quietly beside him like a Stockholm syndrome victim, saying nothing, a deer caught in the headlights, because, of course, this is the president of the United States dictating, once again, trying to dictate Germany's energy security, showing how much foreign policy agency Germany actually has.
Right.
And he didn't agree to it. He didn't say yes. He didn't say, yes, we've agreed to that. He just sat there quiet. One, because, of course, German businesses very much want this pipeline because they need it. They need the energy, and they want to get back to doing business in Russia, which is, a potential very big market for them,
that's
which
another
is being
question,
denied them since the sanctions regime. And at the same time, he's got to deal with his fragile coalition government with the Greens, Annalena Baerbock, the head of the they are the Green Party of Germany that is pro-U.S. imperialism and anti-Russian. I don't understand what that has to do with Green politics. Yeah. But anyway, she is the foreign minister. That was, the deal with the coalition government. And she would love to kill Nord Stream 2, because I guess it'd be better to go back to burning coal.
Or wood, like Putin suggested, which they'd also have to get from Siberia. But, just want real quick.
Which they'd also.
Yeah. Also, percolating underneath this are millions of Germans who are choosing on a monthly basis between paying their heating bill in the freezing winter or buying food.
Yeah, they're not the only ones. There's lots of people in Europe, and the UK, and even in the US, having to make those choices. So anyway, it would seem there's a diplomatic stalemate now. There is no unity among NATO, either on sanctions response. Croatia, Slovakia, and Hungary are really bucking at even the possibility that NATO could get involved in Ukraine, which they've said that they won't. Both the U.S. and NATO have said that, but they're bucking hard even at the possibility that could happen, with the Croatians promising to pull all their troops out of NATO military commands and so on. So there's no unity on NATO military, or there's no unity on any type of sanctions policy.
Right.
There's also no clear diplomatic path forward if the U.S. is not willing to pressure their client state in Kiev to actually fulfill the Minsk Accords, which ultimately is probably the most important factor behind all of this. Meanwhile, the Russian military buildup, as all of this talking is going on, continues. Again, this isn't right on Ukraine's border, but it is in staging areas within Western Russia, and now in Belarus, some 30,000 Russian troops in Belarus.
Yeah, they're preparing defenses and offensive counter moves, basically, in the event they're anticipating a war could come, and they're preparing for it.
They also could be considering a military intervention as the only, if the regime in Kiev refuses the Minsk Accords and NATO refuses, any type of security guarantees, I do believe that, of Russia, the president has spoken of, that they would take their security then into their own hands if diplomacy fails, and take appropriate military technical measures, which is the Russian government's way of saying that all options are on the table. And one of those options is a military intervention in Ukraine. And, if you take a look at the types of forces that Russia is assembling, at a distance back from Ukraine, a lot of it is they have brought amphibious landing ships from as far away as the Baltic Fleet and the Caspian, which are now in the Black Sea. They just passed through the Dardanelles. That would be used for amphibious assaults, theoretically on Odessa and other points in the Black Sea. They are moving large numbers of the Russian National Guard, Rosgvardia, west. What would they be used for? They would be used for occupation, to provide security of any occupied area. We've also seen large numbers of systems like the S-400, electronic warfare units, and other forces, some fighter units in Belarus. Their only realistic purpose is to provide cover to make sure that NATO does not intervene if Russia intervenes. The military option is still very much on the table as the diplomatic option continues to move forward.
And we'll pick it up there next week. Mark, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all the news we have for you right now. For Community Public Radio, I'm Don DeBar in New York. Thanks for listening.